preface what I'm about to say with that. I know you have difficult work to do. But my opinion is this entire thing is a disaster. And it's not just an embarrassing diplomatic failure. This is a dangerous national security failure, in my opinion. I want to examine for a moment, going into this negotiation, what the goals were of both sides. And I think ours were pretty transparent and clearly stated. We wanted to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran. That was our hope. That's why we had sanctions, and that's why we went into this, in the hopes that Iran would say, well, we were going to walk away from the things you need for a weapons program. We're going to prove to the world that we have changed our behavior, and we're going to try to become a responsible member of the international community. That was our goal. Their goal was different, and I believe this all along. I've said this in the past. I believe you believe this, although, and that is that they went into this goal with this very simple. They went into this negotiation with a simple goal. They wanted to achieve the maximum amount of sanctions relief that they could get without having to agree to any irreversible concessions on their nuclear program. And I want to examine for a moment what we have given up just to get a joint plan of action. The first thing is we've implicitly agreed that they now have a right to enrich at any level. And I know that we're going to argue that we can always pull that back, but we have walked away from multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions and have implicitly agreed that Iran now has a right to enrich. That's going to be the baseline for this or any future negotiation moving forward, that they now have some sort of inherent right to enrich and reprocess. The second thing that's happened, just to get a joint plan of action, is Iran has enjoyed real relief here. And it's not just the direct sanctions that have been lifted. It's the indirect relief that they've gotten. The increases in consumer confidence and the confidence of businesses in their economy. The third thing is it stopped the momentum. There was real international momentum on sanctions, which is what ultimately probably even brought them to the table at some respect. That momentum has now been stopped in its tracks. In fact, it's worse than that. It has now made it more difficult to reimpose sanctions in the future. To try to go back and say, if you violated this, we're going to reimpose sanctions, the task of doing that has not become more difficult. And the fifth is we have left completely untouched the missiles program that they have, that they continue to develop. And let me explain to people, to the extent anyone's watching this at home, what that missile program is about. They are developing a long-range rocket that will be able to reach the United States and other places in Europe. That's what they're developing, and that's what they're headed towards. And there's only one reason why you develop a rocket like that, and that's to put a nuclear warhead on it. Let's not mention their state sponsor of terrorism. There's no nation on earth that uses terrorism more than they do as an element of statecraft. So let's back up and look at Iran's point of view in this whole thing. They now have achieved an acknowledged right that didn't used to exist, an acknowledged right to enrich. They've stopped the momentum on more sanctions. They've made future sanctions even harder. They're not concerned about the United States carrying out any military action against them. In fact, I think they view it as almost a near impossibility at this stage. And I know we're going to hear all this talk about, well, you know, this whole thing is contingent upon other things and bragging about all the things that can be in a future deal. A nuclear weapon program has three critical components: enrichment, weaponization, and the delivery of that weapon. On enrichment, they've now given them an acknowledged right to keep that capacity. On weaponization, that's been outsourced to the IAEA, which has already said they're having trouble getting into some of these sites, like some of the secret military sites of the past. They won't even show us what they did in the past. And I've already talked about how the missiles remain untouched. And by the way, if they violate, let's say you do reach a deal with them, if they violate any component of this, it will all be based on our ability to do two things: find that violation and punish that violation. In the finding of that violation, we are dealing with a government that has consistently had a secret program. And I promise you they will rope-a-dope us. You can think you're going to have inspectors crawling all over the place. They can rope-a-dope us for months at a time. Hopefully the world is, in their mind, hopefully the world is distracted by some other crisis somewhere on the planet, and they rope-a-dope us on the inspection element of it. And on reimposing sanctions, well, reimposing international sanctions, let me tell you how hard that's going to be. The Russians, or at least the separatists that they're arming, just shot down a commercial airplane. They just killed almost 300 innocent civilians, and we have had to drag our allies and others kicking and screaming just to increase sanctions a little bit more. So how hard do you think it's going to be to reimpose sanctions on this thing if it falls apart? And I just think the danger in here is quite frank. We're going to wake up one day, after this administration is long gone, some future president or future administration is going to wake up one day and realize they've had a secret weaponization program all along. All they have to do is flip the switch now on the enrichment capability. They have a long-range weapon that they can arm. They're either a threshold nuclear power or, in fact, become a nuclear power. And at that point, what will we have? A country that now has spread their influence of terrorism so they can asymmetrically attack those who seek to impose sanctions against them. A sanctions regime that fell apart years ago and is almost impossible to put back together, with Europeans and other countries now heavily invested in their economy. A country that will basically have a nuclear weapon. Think of North Korea, but motivated by radical Islamic beliefs, with the capability to hit major U.S. cities, not to mention our allies in Europe, and of course Israel. And by the way, all these rockets that are landing in Israel from Gaza, guess where they came from? Many of them. From Iran. That's what these people do. So look, I think we all hope and wish that this thing would work out. But I think there are very few among us in this committee that think that it will. And I'm sad that we're going to be wrong about it. And I'm also sad that anyone who criticizes this deal is often characterized as a warmonger, that we just want to go to war and carpet bomb people. On the contrary, here's what I don't want to see. I don't want to see us fall into a situation where sanctions is no longer an option because you can't put it back together, and now war is the only option, because war is a terrible thing. It is a horrible thing. The only thing worse than war is crazy people with a nuclear weapon that can reach the United States of America on a rocket. That's the only thing that's worse than a war with regard to this situation. I hope I'm wrong. I don't believe that I am. And I fear, Mr. Chairman, that someday soon we will wake up to the reality that they have done a North Korea on us. They've acquired a nuclear weapon. They can hold the world hostage with that weapon, and there's very few or little we can do about it.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator.